Hi, it's Kerr9000 here for the Gunkiss Murder Mystery Channel. And today I'm going to be talking about the Trumpet Street murder in 1885. Now, it focuses around a relationship between a lady called Elizabeth Williamson and her partner James Tucker, the man whose name she'd taken but not married. To him, marriage was something to be avoided, and he insisted on remaining single despite Elizabeth's protests. It was something that she came to accept. But when they moved into a tiny terraced house near Sneinton Market in the summer of 1876, it was something she kept to herself, letting people believe they were a married couple. From the start, the relationship was difficult. Tucker could be violent when under the influence of alcohol, which unfortunately quite a few people can be. Neighbours would report arguments, many of which often resulted in Elizabeth being punched. But these neighbours also knew that the lady herself was no angel. She would often spend the night in the pub goading Tucker, goading him into violent rages. By the early 1880s, she'd begun to find solace in a bottle. And this in turn increased the tension within the household, increasing the likelihood of violence. And it actually led to her being imprisoned for assault. But after serving 3 months, she returned to Sneinton, but the relationship was clearly damaged beyond any point of return. In March 1885, they moved to a house in Trumpet Street, possibly to be near Elizabeth's father for added support. Any pretense that they were married had been dropped by this time, with her new neighbours totally aware of the situation from day one. Tucker had become very open about his disgust for Elizabeth, beating her regularly. She in turn had continued to drink even more. 8 weeks after the move, the situation came to a final end. Tucker and Elizabeth had been drinking with a friend, Henry Emerson, in the house in Trumpet. It had been a long night, and this was the second pub that they'd been in since early evening. Both were what you'd call a little worse for wear. And around 10:30 that night, she brought the last of several rounds of drinks, and after finishing off her half pint, left the two men in the bar to walk the short distance home. Tucker stayed and talked to Emerson, damning Elizabeth for still being with him. Emerson in turn accused him of being too violent and told him that he should leave the lady before things got any worse. But Tucker was in no mood to leave her. Returning home, the inevitable row started the second he walked inside the house. This time instigated by him. He was angry, frustrated, depressed and drunk. At some point in the fight that followed, he knocked her to the floor and he took a stone bottle which contained paraffin, poured its contents all over her, struck a match and set the lady ablaze. Across the road, a neighbour, William Savage, saw the fire through the front window of the house and he ran across the street, forced his way in and found Tucker standing over and now fiercely burning Elizabeth. He screamed out for help and a second neighbour, John Dykes, who'd been in his own yard filling a bucket with water, came in and they used this to extinguish the flames. The two men had managed to save Elizabeth's life, but Tucker, according to evidence given later, stood by the fireplace and looked on disinterestedly, occasionally shouting at them to leave her and to let the bitch burn. Hearing all the commotion, Henry Emerson, only too aware of Tucker's mood, came into the house just as Tucker began to lash out at Elizabeth again. This time, he was kicking the burned lady on the floor. I mean, yeah. It's pure torture. You know, if you've ever burnt yourself, the barest touch is agony. So imagine having been set ablaze and then kicked. Elizabeth by this time was barely conscious. She was totally unable to protect herself, and Emerson quickly stepped across her, shouting at Tucker to leave her be. But he was far too gone with rage. The two men grappled, and Emerson, being the more sober of the two, eventually got in a blow that knocked Tucker to the ground. He scooped up Elizabeth in his arms and took her to the General Hospital. When Constable Brown arrived at the house, having been brought by William Savage, it was after midnight. Tucker was still in a state of rage and shouted his innocence to anyone who would listen. He refused to leave the house and he claimed that Elizabeth had thrown an oil lamp at him, but the contents had fallen on her and set her alight, and that he was not the guilty party. But thankfully, the police constable was a very observant man. As Tucker continued to rant, the officer saw on a shelf behind Tucker the lamp still intact. He picked up the bottle on the floor and, smelling it, knew the smell was paraffin. And this is what, according to his later statement, made him know that Tucker was lying. It took further police help and a serious scuffle in the front room of the house to get the man out onto the street to arrest him. On Sunday the 10th of May, the medical opinion was such that the injuries that had been sustained by Elizabeth were so serious that her chance for survival was virtually nothing. So, basically, due to the laws at the time, for any realistic chance of conviction, they needed to talk to Elizabeth Williamson while they could and record her version of events. But, again, due to the laws at the time, Tucker had to witness this statement. So the man who'd set the lady on fire and kicked her had to be there while she explained what he'd done. How awful is that? Elizabeth, conscious and considerable pain and aware of the fact the guy was there, had to give her statement. I mean, how difficult must that have been? The small party of legal men, Tucker and her treating doctor, gathered round the bed mid-morning to hear and record every word that she said. Elizabeth gave her version of events and it fit the evidence found by the police. She said that Tucker had kicked her to the ground, poured paraffin on her, set her alight, but even on her point of death, she insisted that she believed he'd not been aware of his actions. He'd been in such a state of rage. Tucker said nothing throughout the short meeting and was returned to prison afterwards, where he was charged with unlawful wounding. The coroner's court held at the hospital on the following Monday heard the evidence from all those involved, but it was the police evidence that damned Tucker more than any other. The police said that Tucker had offered no mitigating circumstances and he showed no signs of concern and exhibited disappointment when he was told that Elizabeth was still alive. It was this hostile attitude, despite a change of heart on the Sunday when he attended hospital, that convinced the court not only of his guilt, but of his intent. There was no doubt in the minds of the jurors, having heard the police evidence, that James Tucker was not only culpable, but also guilty of murder. The trial opened on the 14th of July 1885, and it was a short and decisive one. It was at this point that it was discovered that Tucker had used several aliases over the past few years, and he stood in the dock as Joseph, not James. He appeared calm, as he had done throughout his incarceration. The prosecution's case was straightforward. He'd committed murder by setting fire to Elizabeth Williamson as a result of an argument. Tucker had no sustainable defence for his actions, so the defence didn't try to disprove it. They basically just tried to argue strongly in favour of manslaughter. Aware from the outset that it was pointless to try and show he'd not killed her, they decided to go with a plea of drunkenness in mitigation, which would, they thought, remove the prospect of the gallows. It was probably the only sensible defence option they could do. On Saturday, the 1st of August, Berry, the executioner and one-time member of Nottingham Police Force, arrived in the city to supervise the necessary preparations. 3 days later, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Tucker made for the fateful walk to the scaffolding, which had been erected in the yard of Nottingham Gaol on St George's Street. It was a bank holiday and the city was teeming with people heading off to catch early trains for the coast. A silence fell as the clock chimed out the hour, followed by the muted buzz of anticipation. And then justice was served. Right. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other. Laters taters.